I welcome you all to my second video of the DSP series. In this video, I would be explaining you how to remember the four formulas and their inverses, say Fourier series, Fourier transform, Discrete-Time Fourier series, Discrete-Time Fourier transform from the simple method. Okay, so I'll draw a simple table for it. The table goes like this. Okay, now I'll represent time here and frequency over here. Okay, once I'm done with this, what I'll do is I'll write continuous here, okay, discrete over here. Why I'm writing this, you'll get to know later. Fine. Here I'll write it as periodic, here I'll write it as non-periodic. Now we have non-periodic over here, the same thing I'm copying it here. Periodic, I will write it over here. Similarly, here discrete is there, so I will write discrete over here. Here I will write continuous. Fine? Yes. Now, I just write F, which represents Fourier, okay, at 4 cases. Once I'm done with this, what I'll do is I'll just write series over here and transforms over here. Okay, fine. Now once I'm done with this, I know that here you can see it is discrete in time domain. So I'll just write dt, dt. There you go. The table is ready. Now using this table, let us see how to decode each of those formulas and their inverses. Okay, fine. Now let us see the Fourier series first. In the case of Fourier series, we know that any formula here, for example, will convert time domain to frequency domain. Okay, what kind of signal in time domain will be converted into what kind of spectrum in frequency domain is what matters. Okay, fine. Fourier series. Now here one thing with respect to the notation, what should be kept in mind is that the capital letters represent the frequency domain, whereas the small letters represent the time domain. Okay, fine. Now capital X, which will be the result of a Fourier series or any other transformations, and small x, which will be the input. Okay, fine. Now here I can see that the Fourier series will convert a continuous periodic time domain signal to discrete non-periodic frequency domain spectrum. Correct? Hence, what I will do is, since it is continuous in time domain, I will represent it by t. Then, since it is discrete in frequency domain, I will represent it by k. Okay? Clear with it? Fine. Now, since it is continuous in time domain, I will represent it by an integral. Then I can see that it is periodic in time domain. Since I know that it is periodic in time domain, what I will do is, we know that periodic signals will repeat at a regular intervals of their time period. Say let us consider a sinusoidal signal which is varying with respect to time. If this is 0 and then this becomes 2 pi, this becomes 4 pi, this becomes 6 pi. So we can see that for every 2 pi intervals the signal is repeating. So therefore I can represent this 0 to 2 pi as a time period t. So therefore I'll just write it as 0 to t. Fine. Now after this I'll represent a Euler's term e raised to the power j kt with the angular frequency omega. Fine. Then obviously the dt, which is the variable on which the integration will take place, and 1 divided by t. Okay, so this forms the formulae for the Fourier series. Now once I am done with the Fourier series, let us see the inverse Fourier series. Inverse Fourier series again remains very simple. It just converts frequency domain signal to a time domain signal. So again the reference remains the same. Since it is continuous in time domain, Since it is continuous in time domain, I have written t. Since it is discrete in the frequency domain, I have written k. Fine. Once I am done with this, I know that since the signal is discrete, since the spectrum is discrete in the frequency domain, I will represent it by a summation. Fine. Once it is discrete in the frequency domain, I can see that it is also non-periodic. Since it is non-periodic, I cannot consider this property over there because the signal continuously varies from any point to any point. So there is no a sort of repetition which is observed. So therefore what do? K ranges from minus infinity to plus infinity. Okay. Now once I am done with this, then again I will introduce a Euler's term, e raised to the power j omega k t. That's all. So this is the formulae for calculating the inverse Fourier series. Okay. Now let us look into the formulae for computation of Fourier transform, discrete-time Fourier series and discrete-time Fourier transform. So as we did with the Fourier series, Fourier transform also converts a time domain signal into frequency domain spectrum. So Fourier transform, let us represent again the capital X which represents the frequency domain, okay, and the small x which represents the time domain. Frequency transform is converting continuous non-periodic time domain. So since it is continuous in time domain, I am writing it as t, okay, and since it is continuous in time domain, I am representing it by an integral. The Fourier transform is continuous in frequency domain, so therefore I am writing it as omega. Now once I am done with that, what I will do is Fourier transform is non-periodic. Therefore, I will take the limits to be minus infinity to plus infinity. Then I will introduce a Euler's term, e raised to the power minus j omega t dt. Fine. T is the basic because t is the integral or the variable on which the integration takes place. Now let us see how do I write the formula for inverse Fourier transform. Again the same logic, x of t I write it on my LHS and followed by capital X of omega which represents the frequency domain. Now here I can see that this signal is continuous in frequency domain. Here I have frequency component, I represent it in the form of an integral. It is continuous as well as non-periodic. So limit will be minus infinity to plus infinity, and here I will have an term e raised to the power plus j omega t dt 1 divided by 2 pi. So this is how you will be writing the inverse and the Fourier transform formulae. Let us move about that. Let us think about discrete-time Fourier series. Fine. Now as normal, capital X which represents the frequency domain, small x which represents the time domain. It is discrete in time domain. I am representing it by n. It is discrete in frequency domain. I am representing it by k. Fine. Now it says the discrete-time Fourier series is periodic in time domain. Since it is discrete, I represent it by a summation. Since it is periodic, I set the limits of the summation from 0 to capital N minus 1. So this is one of the important point which has to be concentrated on, because generally we write in the case of continuous from 0 to t, but here it is 0 to capital N minus 1, where capital N is the period at which it repeats. Okay. Now I'll introduce the Euler's term, e raised to the power minus j 2 pi k n by capital N into 1 over capital N. Okay, so this is how I'll write it in a neat manner. Okay, yes. So x of k is equal to 1 over n and this summation. So this is how you write the formula of discrete time Fourier series. Now let us see how to write the formulae of discrete time Fourier transform. In the case of discrete time Fourier transform, I'll write x of n on my LHS and capital X of k on my RHS. Now again the logic remains same. It is discrete and periodic in the frequency domain. Hence what do? Since it is discrete in frequency domain and I have a frequency component over here, I'm representing it by summation. Then the k limits would be ranging from 0 to capital N minus 1 e raised to the power j 2 pi kn by capital N. Fine. So this is how you represent the discrete time Fourier series and its inverse. Just to give a brief recap, how did I decode it? Very simple. See, I know that the inverse will always convert the frequency domain signal to a time domain signal. I have represented it by summation because it is discrete in the frequency domain. This is a frequency component, hence I have represented it as in the form of a summation. Then e raised to the power j 2 pi kn by capital N is the Euler's term which I have introduced. Now let us see the discrete time Fourier transform formulae and its inverse. In here from the table I see that it is discrete in time domain, continuous in the frequency domain. However, let's represent the basic frequency domain and the time domain signals. Capital X represents frequency domain, small x represents the time domain. Since it is discrete, I write n over here and I represent it by summation because it is discrete in time domain. Now, after this, I observe that it is non-periodic in time domain. Therefore, n will be ranging from minus infinity to plus infinity. Since it is continuous in the frequency domain, I represent it by omega. And over here, I'll have a Euler's term e raised to the power minus j omega n. Fine. So this is the formula for obtaining the discrete time Fourier transform. And once I am done with discrete time Fourier transform, the inverse would be very simple again. I'll just write x of n on this side, okay, and few terms. Let's see what appear there, and x of omega over here. Now we have a frequency term over here, so therefore it is continuous in the frequency domain, represented by integral. It is periodic in the frequency domain, represented by 0 to 2 pi, 1 divided by 2 pi, and over here e raised to the power j omega n d omega, where omega will be the integral variable. Thank you very much for watching the video. Hope you have liked it. Hope the video was informative and I have conveyed the information effectively. Please share the video with your friends so that they can make use of it, and if you haven't subscribed to my channel, please subscribe, and please do share your valuable comments in the comment section below. Thank you.